I noticed them exchanging quick glances. They clearly rehearsed the conversation the way here, agreeing on who was going to say what. "Have a seat, and he'll get you an aperitif," I said, pointing to the couch. "How's work going, Ezra?" My brother-in-law flinched as if he'd been punched. "Nah, normal," he mumbled. "Just routine." "Really?" I feigned interest. "No interesting cases or tests." Ezra palled even more, if that was even possible. "No, nothing special." I nodded, hiding a smile, and went to the kitchen to get drinks. When I returned with the tray, Helen and Ezra were quietly arguing about something, but instantly stopped talking when they saw me. "Sherry for the ladies, scotch for the gentlemen," I announced, setting the glasses down. To family. We drank, and I noticed that Ezra drained his glass in one gulp, clearly in need of the calming effect of alcohol. So I began in a casual tone. "How are the preparations for your cruise coming along? It's less than a week away, right?" Helen almost choked on her sherry. Ezra stared at the floor. "Actually, Dad," Helen began cautiously, "that's what we wanted to talk about the cruise." I acted surprised. "Is something wrong?" Helen set her glass down and stepped forward, adopting the expression I knew so well, a mixture of concern and determination, the mask she wore when she was about to manipulate. "You see, there's been a little problem with the payment. The company that's organizing the lottery," she cast a quick glance at Ezra, "has run into some legal difficulties, and the payment of the prize has been delayed." "Really?" I tried to look concerned. "So what's the deal now?" "We have to pay in full by the end of the day, or we lost both the reservation and the deposit," Ezra interjected, clearly following a pre-arranged script. 2 months ago, we paid the deposit out of our own money, and the balance was supposed to cover the winnings. I grinned mentally. What an ingenious lie. The deposit, of course, had been made from my card, not from their own funds. "That's terrible," I said, shaking my head. "How much can you lose?" £2,000, Helen replied, biting her lip. "Plus all the vacation days we've booked, which we won't be able to reschedule." I pretended to be deeply thoughtful. "And the total cost of the cruise? 8,000? Ezra said, "We'll need to pay 6 more. 8,000? I raised my eyebrows. "That's a pretty expensive trip for a prize in the work lottery," Helen quickly interjected. "It was a special raffle for top executives, very exclusive." "I see." I nodded, as if that explanation satisfied me completely. "So what do you plan to do?" Helen and Ezra exchanged glances again. The crucial moment of their introduction had arrived. "Actually, Dad," Helen took a deep breath, "we were hoping you could help us out. Borrow 6,000 until next month. As soon as the company solves its problems and pays out the winnings, we'll pay you back right away." I pretended to seriously consider their request. Then I slowly shook my head. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. 6,000 is a lot of money. And then, if there are legal problems with the lottery, who knows when they'll be resolved." "But Dad," Helen's voice became pleading, "we've already planned everything. We've taken vacations, bought new clothes, even booked excursions. And then this is our first real vacation in 5 years." I sighed, finding doubt. "I understand, but 6,000, that's almost all of my savings for a rainy day." "We'll pay it back," Helen exclaimed, starting to lose her temper. "I swear it." I stood up and paced the room as if I needed movement to gather my thoughts. "Let's look at this situation from the other side," I said, stopping at the window. "You say you made the deposit 2 months ago?" "Yes," Helen answered quickly, "at the end of August. And it was your own card?" "Of course," Ezra said, nervously adjusting his tie. "My work card?" I nodded slowly, looking out the window so they couldn't see the expression on my face. And the name of the cruise company? Royal Cruise Line, Helen replied. And what is your stateroom? I continued gradually tightening the noose. Balcony, Ezra said. Premium, premium, I repeated. Sounds luxurious. And what's the itinerary again? The Mediterranean, Helen said. 12 days with stops in Lisbon, Barcelona, Rome, Venice, and the Greek islands. I smiled, still standing with my back to them. Mediterranean elegance, I pronounced. One of Royal Cruise Line's most popular itineraries. Silence hung in the room. I turned it around slowly and saw Helen and Ezra frozen with a look of utter confusion on their faces. Where did Helen started, but stopped short. I walked over to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file folder. You know, I've always been a curious person, I said, turning back to them. When you told me about your winnings, I decided to find out more about the cruise. I called Royal Cruise Line, introduced myself as a potential client, and inquired about their offerings. I opened a folder and pulled out a printout. Imagine my surprise when the operator, upon hearing the last name Wordsworth, immediately found your reservation. Mediterranean Elegance, October 20th, premium cabin with balcony. Deposit £2,000, full price £8,000. I put the printout on the table in front of them, except the operator didn't say anything about a lottery. She did mention that the deposit was made on a credit card in the name of Norton Butterfield. Helen and Ezra's faces turned as pale as chalk. They stared at the printout as if it were a poisonous snake. Dad, we can explain, Helen began. But I held up my hand, stopping her. There's no need. I understand perfectly well. You thought the old man was too stupid to notice that £8,000 had been debited from his card. Or perhaps you thought I didn't deserve the money, that it was rightfully yours. We were going to tell you, Ezra muttered, looking down at the floor. After the cruise, as a surprise? Surprise? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. A surprise for? Who? For me. Surprise, Dad. We stole your money, but we had a great vacation. We didn't steal it, Helen exclaimed, taking the offensive as I expected. We just borrowed. We'd be sure to pay it back. When? I asked calmly. A month from now? A year? Never. And how would you explain writing off that money to me if I noticed? Helen and Ezra were silent, cornered. What I want to understand, I continued, sitting down across from them, is why. Why did you think you were entitled to my money without my knowledge or consent? Helen looked up, and I saw in her eyes not remorse but indignation. Because we deserve it, she said sharply. We took care of you for years, calling, visiting, helping with paperwork and bills. You have no idea how much time and effort we put in. I looked at my daughter, and my heart clenched with bitterness. In her eyes, I saw not love or respect, but cold calculation. To her, I was not a father, but a source of resources that she felt were rightful yours. Is that caring? I asked quietly. Visiting your father once a month when you need something. Calling on birthdays and Christmas, checking to see if I'm still alive to make sure the inheritance is safe. You're being unfair, Helen said, but there was no conviction in her voice. We were doing more than you think. Have we? I shook my head. When I had the flu last winter, who brought me medicine and food? Algie. Who helps me with the garden when my back refuses to work? Mrs. Parker, the neighbor. Who calls just to ask how I'm doing with no ulterior motive? My friends from the chess club. I paused, looking them in the eye. All I ever got from you was disdain disguised as concern. You came when you needed money. You called when you wanted a birthday or Christmas present. Invited you to dinner when you were planning another manipulation. Ezra stared at the floor, unable to meet me gaze. Helen, on the other hand, straightened up, an angry glint in her eyes. It's not fair, she repeated. We did care about you. Maybe not in the way you expected, but we did the best we could. We have our own lives, our own problems. We can't keep running around you all the time." "I never asked for that," I replied calmly. "All I wanted was honesty and respect. But instead, you decided to steal my money." "We didn't steal it," Helen exclaimed again. "We just wanted a vacation. And yes, we may have done wrong by taking your card without asking. But after all the years, we've taken care of you. Don't we deserve a little gratitude?" I looked at my daughter with sadness. Did she really believe what she was saying? Or was this just another attempt at manipulation? "Gratitude can't be stolen, Helen," I said quietly. "It can only be earned. And if you think that years of formal attention entitles you to my money, you're sorely mistaken." Ezra, who had been silent until then, suddenly looked up. "We admit we did wrong," he said, and there was a pleading note in his voice. "But we're in dire straits now. If we don't pay for the cruise by the end of Fede, we'll lose both the deposit and the vacation days we booked. Not to mention that all our friends know about Fetrip," Helen added. "We've already told everyone about the cruise. Can you imagine how we'd look if we suddenly canceled it?" I couldn't believe my ears. Even now that their deception had been exposed, they were only thinking about their reputation and convenience. "What do you suggest?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Lend us the money," Helen said. And it sounded not like a request, but Edmund, 6,000. We'll pay you back as soon as we can. After everything you've done, you dare ask me for money?" I shook my head. "You tried to steal 8,000 pounds from me, lied to my face. And now you're asking me to give you 6,000 pounds willingly. It's not like that," Helen objected. But her voice sounded unsure. "We just didn't think it was a mistake." "A mistake?" I grinned bitterly. "A mistake is when you accidentally dial the wrong number or forget to turn off the lights. What you did was a conscious decision. You planned everything. How to copy my card details, how to make the deposit, how to lie to me about winning the lottery. That's not a mistake, Helen. It's a betrayal." There was a heavy silence in the room. I could see the emotions alternating on Helen's face: anger, fear, despair. Ezra just sat there with his head down as if resigned to defeat. "What are you going to do?" Helen finally asked. "Should I go to the police?" "I could," I answered. "I have all the evidence, card statements, information from the cruise company, your own confession." "It's fraud, Helen, a felony," Ezra shuddered, imagining what this would do to his career at the IRS. Especially now that the audit had begun there. "But you won't do it," Helen said, a note of confidence in her voice. "You wouldn't apply for your own daughter." I stared at her for a long moment, thinking she was right. I wasn't going to go to the police. Not out of pity for her, but because I had another plan. "You're right," I finally said. "I won't go to the police. At least not yet." I could see them both relax a little, figuring the worst was over. "But I won't give you any money either," I continued. "Not 6,000, not 6 pence. You've created this situation and you'll have to deal with the consequences." "But Dad," Helen began, switching back into manipulation mode. "We're going to lose the deposit. 2,000 pounds will just disappear." "Not my problem," I said firmly. "You made a deposit on my card without my permission. Consider that a lesson for the future." Helen and Ezra looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. Their plan was crumbling before their eyes, and they had no backup. "What about lunch?" I asked, standing up. "I made roast beef. It would be a shame if it went to waste." They stared at me in bewilderment, not understanding how I could be thinking about food at a time like this. "I'm not hungry," Helen said coldly. "Suit yourself," I shrugged. "Then I guess our conversation is over then." I headed for the door, signaling that the meeting was over. Helen and Ezra reluctantly rose from the couch. "This isn't over," Helen said, walking past me. "You're going to regret this." I just nodded silently, not wanting to continue the pointless argument. When the door closed behind them, I went back into the living room and sank into a chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The first part of my plan had been accomplished. I had exposed their deception and denied them financial support. Now I had to finish what I had started. I dialed Algie's number. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "Exactly as we expected," I replied. "They came asking for money under the pretense of problems with the lottery winnings." When I revealed that I knew the truth, Helen started saying that they deserved my money for their years of caring. "And how did it end?" I turned them down and hinted that I might go to the police if they kept pushing. "Did they get angry?" Helen was. Ezra was more scared. He was clearly more concerned about the job review than canceling the cruise. "Not surprising," Algie hummed. "Malcolm had said the audit would be very thorough. If Ezra really was taking bribes, he'd be in a lot of trouble." "Well," I said, "the first act is over. Now it's time to prepare for Act 2. Are you sure you want to go on?" There was a note of concern in Algie's voice. Maybe the lesson they'd learned today was enough. I thought for a moment, remembering the look on Helen's face when she said she deserved my money. There was no remorse or shame in her eyes, just indignation that her plan had failed. "No," I said firmly. "It's not now. They have to realize that their actions have consequences, real consequences." It had been a week since our unpleasant conversation with Helen and Ezra. In that time, I hadn't received a call or text from them, an unusually long silence for Helen. Usually didn't miss an opportunity to voice her displeasure. I assumed they were still mulling over what had happened, perhaps looking for other ways to pay for the cruise or trying to recover at least part of the deposit. In the meantime, I finalized the process of changing the will. Benjamin Foxley prepared all the paperwork, and yesterday Algie and I and his old colleague, retired Judge Thomas Harrington, officially signed the new version. Helen was completely excluded, and Percy's share was substantially reduced. The bulk of the inheritance went to my Percy grandchildren, the twins Alfred and Agatha, but only when they reached the age of 25. Until then, the funds were to be administered by Algie as trustee. I learned from Malcolm through Algie that the IRS audit was gaining momentum. The commission had already asked Ezra to explain several suspicious cases, and it appeared that his position was becoming increasingly precarious. It was time for the final act of my little drama. I called Helen and invited her and Ezra to dinner, saying that I wanted to discuss the situation and perhaps find a compromise solution. She agreed reluctantly, but I could hear the hope in her voice. She probably thought I had changed my mind and would give them the money for the cruise after all. I set dinner for Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. I spent the entire day preparing not only the food, but also my speech. He wanted to be precise and clear, leaving no room for manipulation or misunderstanding. An hour before they arrived, Algie came in. We sat in the living room sipping scotch and discussing the final details. "Are you sure you want a complete breakup?" Algie asked. "They are your family after all." I shook my head. "They stopped being my family the moment they decided they could steal from me. Real family doesn't do that." Algie nodded without arguing. He understood better than anyone what I'd been through over the years. "And you really want to go to Scotland?" "It's pretty cold there in late October," I smiled. "Algie, I'm 74 years old. I've put off my desires long enough for the sake of others. It's time to start living for myself while there's still time." My friend raised his glass. "Here's to a new chapter in your life, Norton." We drank, and shortly afterward, Algie left. He didn't want to be present for the conversation, thinking it should be a family affair. But we agreed to meet tomorrow to discuss the details of our trip to Scotland. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and went to open it. Helen and Ezra stood on the doorstep. Both of them looked tense and tired, especially Ezra. His face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in nights. "Come in," I said, trying to sound neutral. They walked silently into the living room. I noticed that they kept their distance from each other, a sign that they were probably at odds. "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch. "Would you like something to drink?" "No, thank you," Helen answered. "Let's get right to the point, Dad. You said you wanted to discuss a compromise." I nodded and sat down in the chair opposite them. "Yes. I want to clear the air and determine how we're going to move forward." Ezra was nervously rubbing the cuff of his shirt. Helen sat up straight with her hands folded in her lap, a posture she always adopted when she was preparing for a confrontation. "For starters," I said, "I'd like to know if you've been able to resolve the cruise issue." Helen pressed her lips together. "No, we lost both the deposit and the reservation." "I see." I nodded. "What about the vacation?" "We had canceled," Ezra answered quietly. "Work is a complicated situation at work right now." I looked at him more closely. From the look of him, difficult. Situation was an understatement. "A test?" I asked innocently. Ezra flinched and Helen threw me a sharp look. "How do you know about the test?" she asked suspiciously. I shrugged my shoulders. Buckingham is a small town. News travels fast. Ezra swallowed nervously. "Yeah, there's an internal audit going on at the IRS right now. The whole department is under investigation." "That's unpleasant," I said, trying to sound sympathetic. "And why such a check suddenly? Anonymous Denchionchin?" Ezra answered, his voice trembling. "Someone provided information about misconduct by certain employees." "Including you?" I asked bluntly. Ezra lowered his eyes, not answering. Helen intervened. "It's just a misunderstanding. Ezra has an impeccable reputation. The commission will look into it and everything will be cleared up." I nodded, pretending to believe it. "I hope so. By the way, while we're on the subject of official business, I wanted to let you know that I've made some changes to my will." Helen tensed even more, if that was even possible. "What kind of changes?" "Substantial ones," I replied. "I have completely excluded you, Helen, from inheritance." Her face showed shock, which quickly turned to rage. "You can't do that," she exclaimed. "I am your daughter." "I can and I did," I replied calmly. "The will was formalized and signed yesterday in the presence of 2 witnesses. It's not fair." Helen jumped up from the sofa. "Just because of one mistake, you're taking me out of the will." I looked at her for a long moment. "It's not one mistake, Helen. It's the culmination of years of neglect, manipulation, and lies. You and Ezra tried to steal a substantial amount of money from me. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. What about Percy?" she asked, ignoring my words. "Did you cut him out too?" "I've reduced his Sharetto the minimum legally possible. The bulk of the inheritance will now go to my grandchildren by Percy when they turn 25. Until then, the funds will be administered by a trustee." "That's not fair," Helen exclaimed. "Percy doesn't even visit you. He calls once a year at Christmas, and that's only because I remind him." "And yet, he's never tried to steal my money," I replied. But that wasn't the only thing I wanted to talk about. I pulled an envelope out of my desk drawer and placed it on the table in front of them. "What's this?" Ezra asked, looking at the envelope prehenily. "A copy of an anonymous letter that was sent to the IRS 2 weeks ago. It contains information about your informal counseling for certain clients, Ezra, with names, dates, and amounts." Ezra turned so pale I was afraid he was going to be sick. Helen looked from the envelope to me, her face contorted with anger and shock. "Was that you?" Ezra whispered. You sent the denunciation. Technically, I didn't. I picked up the phone, steadying myself for the conversation. I want to be honest with you, Helen, I began, my voice firm. But the information was provided. By me. I could hear the shock in her voice, even through the line. Why? Ezra's voice cracked slightly, a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who rarely showed much emotion. Why are you doing this to me? I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the years of the lies and manipulation fill the space between. U.S. For the same thing I did to Helen, I said, keeping my voice even. For years of lies, manipulation, and neglect. For treating me not as a father and father-in-law, but as a convenient ATM machine to be used at will. Helen's voice rose to a shriek, filled with disbelief and fury. You're ruining our lives, she screamed. Because of some stupid cruise, you're willing to destroy Ezra's career and disinherit me. No, Helen, I said, shaking my head slowly. My gaze fixed on the floor as if the weight of her words had no power over me. Not because of a stupid cruise. It's because you've shown me your true attitude. You've shown that you don't see me as a man worthy of respect and honesty. To you, I'm nothing more than a source of resources to exploit. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the gravity of my words settle in. There. Faces were strained, but they didn't speak. I could see the shift, the realization dawning on them that this wasn't just about a simple misunderstanding. This was about something deeper, years of disregard, of taking advantage, and of expecting. More without giving anything in return. But I have a proposal, I continued, shifting my posture in my chair. A compromise, if you will. They both looked at me, their faces weary but curious. I won't file a formal police report for credit card fraud, I said, my voice steady. That could cause bigger problems for Ezra, especially now that he's already under investigation by the IRS. For a brief moment, I saw the flicker of hope in their eyes, like trapped animals looking for an escape. They probably thought I was backing down, showing some mercy. But my next words shattered that illusion. All I ask in return, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, is that you disappear from my life completely. What? Helen's expression was a mix of shock and disbelief. No calls, no visits, no letters, no messages. No chance encounters in town. No contact at all. I want you to cease to exist for me, and I for you. Ezra's eyes lowered to the floor, but Helen's rage was palpable. She stood up, her face twisted in anger. You can't demand such a thing. I'm your daughter. I can and I do, I responded firmly, not budging from my stance. And it's because you're my daughter that it hurts me the most to see the kind of person you've become. A person who thinks it's okay to steal from their own father. Helen took a step toward me, fists clenched in frustration. But I didn't move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, placing it in front of them with a cold deliberation. Here's all the evidence of your fraud, I said, looking them both in the eye. Your card statements, a recording of my conversation with Royal Cruise Line confirming the reservation in your names, and even a recording of our conversation where you admitted to the theft. If you violate our agreement, I continued, my voice calm but unyielding, this information will go straight to the police. Ezra looked horrified, his face paling as he looked from the flash drive to me. Helen, however, stood there, glaring at me with such pure hatred that I momentarily felt a knot in my stomach. You're going to regret this, she hissed, her words sharp and venomous. You're an old, sick man. Who's going to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself? I didn't flinch at her words. I have friends, Helen, I said quietly. Real friends who appreciate me for who I am, not for my money or any potential inheritance. And unlike you, they've never betrayed me. I stood up slowly, signaling that the conversation was over. Now I think you'd better leave, I said, my tone final. Our dinner is canceled. Ezra rose, his shoulders sagging as he still avoided. Meeting my eyes, Helen, still furious, gave me one last glare. You're going to regret this, she repeated, her voice cold and filled with contempt. When you're alone, without family, without support, you'll remember this day. Maybe, I replied calmly, my voice steady. But at least I'll know I did the right thing and kept my dignity. Now please leave. They didn't respond, but Helen stalked out toward the car, her footsteps quick and purposeful. Ezra hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, perhaps apologize, perhaps explain himself, but he simply nodded and followed his wife outside. I closed the door behind them, feeling a strange sense of finality settle in my chest. It wasn't joy or triumph that filled me. Instead, it was a quiet, almost sad certainty that I had done what was necessary, that the weight I had carried for so many years of deceit, manipulation, and disregard had finally been lifted. I didn't feel victorious, just relieved. Sitting down in my favorite armchair, I poured myself a glass of scotch, feeling. The warmth of the liquid spread through my chest. The first sip burned as it slid down, but there was comfort in that burn. I leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, and thought of Elizabeth. If she were here, I knew she would have been saddened by the rift with Helen, but I also knew her well enough to understand that she would respect my decision. She'd always believed in fairness, and she would have seen the need for what I'd done. The days that followed were filled with preparations for my trip to Scotland. Algie and I booked our rooms in small, charming hotels along the route, marked a few spots to visit, and even bought new hiking boots for the walks we had planned through the hills and valleys. I woke early the day we were set to leave, drinking my tea while watching the first rays of sunlight bathe my garden in golden hues. Despite the morning's warmth, a part of me still felt the weight of the choice I'd made. But there was no regret. I double-checked everything, making sure I had everything I needed, locked up the house, and stepped outside where Algie was waiting in his old but immaculately maintained Jaguar. Ready for an adventure? He asked, his smile infectious. More than ready, I replied, slipping into the passenger seat. We left Buckingham as the town was just starting to wake up. A long day of driving lay ahead, but I didn't feel the exhaustion I might have once expected. On the contrary, every mile that separated me from my old life brought a sense of freedom and endless possibilities. You know, Algie said as we joined, the freeway. I've always believed it's never too late to start living the life you want. I looked out the window, watching the countryside drift by the fields, the villages, the rolling hills stretching into the horizon. The world was wide and beautiful, and for the first time in years, I could see it for what it was. I was free from the weight of a false relationship. You're right, my friend, I said with a nod. It's never too late. The car rolled smoothly down the highway, carrying us further away from Buckingham, from the past, and from the years of disappointment. Scottish lakes, majestic castles, cozy villages, and pubs that serve the best whiskey in the world, all of that was waiting for U.S. I was ready to embrace it.